Today on the X-Files, we've dug deep into the vault to bring you a Discord-voted manga. If you'd like to suggest and vote on what manga we cover in the series, I'll leave a link to the Discord down below. But without further delay, let's jump right into Genki Ono's table tennis flop. Full name, Full Drive. Start date, October 23rd, 2017. End date, February 19th, 2018. Total chapters 16, compiled into 3 volumes. Genki Ono would pop up in 2011, getting an honorable mention at the 52nd Jump Treasure Newcomer Manga Award for Koi ni Sake Mikoto. He would follow this up with The Gun-Cutting Sword in My Heart in the first issue of Jump Live. Jump Live being Shueisha's first attempt at an online platform or manga magazine that predated Jump Plus, with many series from it moving to Jump Plus after that started up. 2014's winter issue of Jump Next would then see them publish the one-shot Dobu no Kyuuki, or The Sewer Vampire, a school manga featuring a vampire boy which looks to have some romance elements. In the 16th issue of Jump in 2015, we would then get Achouchou the Red Haired. This is another romantic tinged one-shot following a boy who knows martial arts and a girl who can strengthen others with the power of her love. 2016 would then see Haruka Kanata, a judo one-shot, get published in Jump Giga, and the next year in Jump's 47th issue of 2017, we would finally reach Full Drive, Ono's first series after a large number of one-shots. Full Drive begins by introducing our main character, Tamashiro Dan, who is currently en route to Japan after staying in Germany with his grandfather, who taught him table tennis. We learn that his grandpa's name was Hagen Wolf, and he was a monstrous German table tennis pro, but has apparently just passed away, spurring the move back to Japan. We also learn of a fashionable Japanese table tennis prodigy called Marin Kitagawa, who just so happens to be a big fan of Hagen Wolf, and this introduction sets up these two characters who seem linked by fate, bumping into each other in Japan, with them quickly meeting again at a table tennis club. Here we get to see one of the manga's biggest strengths, its art, and in particular the impact Genki Ono illustrates when a ball is hit. As well as this, Genki Ono has a really distinct style when it comes to faces and expressions, which I really like too. Another thing this first chapter establishes is Dan is a bit of a flake. He's a nice boy who lets others get away with insulting him or bumping into him. In his own words, he's used to being underestimated. But when it comes to table tennis, he's a beast. It's the one thing he takes pride in. When you bring Marin into the equation, you get some really great chemistry in my opinion. There's a cute relationship between a pushover and a tsundere, but the thing they value the most, table tennis, is something they both do not want to lose at, which sparks a rivalry. I think it's also cool that they're a boy and girl rival pair, which isn't something you usually see in sports manga. It's a romantic sports rivalry effectively. The first match they have has so much passion and impact, you clearly see their love of the game, and the high they get during their rally is infectious. As it winds down though, Marin tells Dan that right now is the golden time for table tennis in Japan, as all sorts of talented young players are rising up, and he's invited to join Setagaya Table Tennis Academy. It's the only one of its kind, but it's a place where Dan will surely get to hone his skills. At the school we meet some new characters and the owner, who acknowledges that despite Dan seeming kind of aloof, he has a hunger inside of him. We get another match here full of great art, and something that might be hit or miss for you in Full Drive is its explanation of things. It pretty quickly goes into depth with table tennis, mentioning different techniques, types of drives, etc, but overall I think it lends to a good balance of explanation and seeing the match unfold. When we're not tackling table tennis, the manga gets pretty wordy, and it often revolves around Dan and his relationships with the other players. His core character motivations involve him not being judged for his grandpa's name, but for his own. I think on paper this is a fine motivation, but not enough is really done with it, and aside from Marin, nobody even seems to care at all for his grandpa other than acknowledge that he was a good player. It definitely is a contributing factor to why Dan might feel so bland for many. The majority of the manga then serves to introduce new characters, their playstyles, they have a match with Dan and they build on their relationship with him. Marin pops up here and there to be a tsundere and to keep a light romantic element constant. It does mix things up. For instance, I love the date chapter where Dan and Marin go sicko mode on some cocky older boys. It's funny and nice to see them together like this in a more casual setting. As the manga goes on to its final volume, we're introduced to Yukiya, an even bigger cocky prodigy than Dan, who doesn't even like table tennis but plays because he just happens to have the talent for it. This infuriates Dan as someone who loves the game and who has been inspired by those that love the game in turn, like his grandpa and Marin. Yukiya tries to brush off the feelings and hard work of others, but Dan doesn't let him and is adamant he can show him that table tennis is fun. This may be the final match before the series would be cancelled, but regardless, Genki Ono decided to really go all out. Both players hold table tennis as the only thing they have, and it's cool how Dan and Yukiya mirror each other to an extent. But while Dan loves the sport wholeheartedly, Yukiya had grown to hate it, becoming focused on the aspect of winning. Knowing it was all he had was a tremendous burden on him, forcing him to routinely play it so he could be the best and not disappoint his mother. But Dan helps to drag out the love and passion he did once feel for the sport, and while we don't get to see the rest of the match in full, it ends on a nice note. The final chapter then sees an older Dan and Marin meet up again, and Marin reaffirms Dan that he is his own person and he's someone to be proud of with how far he's made it in the table tennis world. It mirrors their first meeting too, as they have one more match between each other, but now they're a lot more open to their feelings with each other. I really like it, and I think it really solidifies their relationship and dynamic. Rival lovers are just really cool. So, why did Full Drive get cancelled? As much as I like it and its characters, I think Full Drive does struggle in multiple areas. Dan and Marin are very hit and miss. Marin's tsundere act has been stated a lot by others to be annoying, and Dan is a little bit more complex and unusual. He's an odd balance of milquetoast and kind, as well as super cocky. Early matches and setups also aren't super exciting, and by the time it's found its footing in the final match with Yukiya, who is a fairly interesting character for Dan to have a match with, the manga is pretty much over. Haikyuu was still doing really well when Full Drive ended too, so there would have been less interest presumably in letting another sports series coast in the magazine, and Jump has a fairly high standard it seems for sports series, as the vast majority of them get axed really early on. Haikyuu also had the cover in the issue Full Drive ended, cementing this idea. And another thing about this issue is it also featured Golem Hearts ending at the exact same time. Jump was cleaning house for a new batch where we would get Ziga, Noah's Notes, and a little manga called Jujutsu Kaisen. The only thing I can think of axing instead of it would maybe be Robot X Laserbeam, which would end in a few months later anyway, but it was another sports series that was doing better than Full Drive anyway, so I don't think that would have been feasible. But what does everyone else on the Discord think? Gaming Ghost didn't really think there was much going on for the series and found some of its action hard to read in its earlier chapters, but they did like the final antagonist. A Funny Name found the beginning awful, Dan bland, and Marin annoying. Witch Sarah found Dan bland and Marin annoying. Meru only read the first chapter because they found it dipped in quality soon after. Shiranasu found it generic and had a slow start, and they didn't think Dan and Marin had any chemistry at all. Holly the Apothecary found it boring, they found Dan bland and Marin annoying, which is becoming a pattern now. They also didn't care much for the final arc and found the ball hard to follow sometimes, and the romance they said was cringe, which I really disagree with and it makes me a bit sad. And finally, we found someone else who does like Marin, Xenomat, but they do criticize the manga writing her out at points. Cactus also seemed to like Marin despite being scared at first due to her tsundere attitude, but found the romantic development nice and one of its best aspects. I'm actually glad someone got relatively the same things at a full drive as I did. Characters also found it mostly underdeveloped overall though, since it didn't get much time to flesh out anything. The sidecast and its potential dive into its theme of hard work versus talent also didn't impress him. Shizu also timed in with a lot more thoughts than most, digging a bit more into what makes a sports manga stick in the magazine, and one thing Full Drive lacked to them was an interesting conflict or dynamic, and I sadly agree. It did meander a bit too much, and the team that Dan is introduced to isn't all that interesting and doesn't really get focused on. Genki Ono clearly likes romance and wanted to write some in, but it did come at the expense of the story being somewhat wishy-washy and under-focused. So yeah, most people really didn't like Full Drive, and I'm not that surprised. I'm definitely the oddball here. I really like Dan personally. He's a bit of an oddball too. Marin is also an archetype I really like. Think Asuka from Evangelion. People who are super prideful and full of themselves are really cool to me, and I think it leads to the two of them having a fun dynamic between each other that's interesting and believable. They have chemistry through their rivalry, and their downtime personalities clash a bit, which I think makes for some really cute moments. So overall, they're a fun couple for me, but I recognize that most people didn't get what I got out of it. Following the ending of Full Drive, Genki Ono wouldn't waste any time, with Draconir, a one-shot coming out at the end of 2018 in the same issue as Chainsawman. This would follow a boy who learns that his late grandmother fought dragons and takes up her mantle alongside this cool sisterly figure. Reception for this was exceedingly popular, and I remember at the time it came out, people said it was well received in Japan, and looking at old forums, that seems to be the case too. But for whatever reason, it wouldn't become a series, with Genki Ono doing assistant work instead on Blue Box and Witch Watch. 2021 would eventually come around with a new one-shot of his in the 23rd issue of the year named Yashatsubaki. This looks to be set in feudal era Japan and mixes battle elements with comedy and romance aspects. Genki Ono's art has improved a lot too, and while it isn't translated, there are some Japanese voice comics you can watch to get a sense of the story. And that brings us to today, where Genki Ono's second serialization, Himaten, has recently begun. Himaten seems to be the culmination of the romance elements Genki Ono has seemingly been fond of, and his experience on being an assistant on Blue Box and Witch Watch, with it being a pure rom-com this time. His art has gotten a lot more refined and has shifted stylistically quite a bit to fit this genre more. I think his writing in general is also a lot more solid. His new characters are more likable, and while it isn't going to get any awards for being unique, it's a good standard romance manga so far with an interesting hook. Being the main characters are a boy who cleans as a part-time job and a fashion influencer who runs her own business. I like their dynamic a lot, and I see a bit of Dan and Marin there, but it's a lot safer and just more refined. I think it has a decent chance to stick around for a while, and I'm happy Genki Ono is back. Hopefully this will finally be a hit for him. And with that, the Axe File on Full Drive is done. It's clearly a manga that most people didn't vibe with, and it's lacking in quite a few areas, but that won't stop me for remembering it as a charming little sports manga with some characters I really like. If you want more videos like this, I have a whole series of Axe Files on different cancelled Shonen Jump manga for you to watch. But if you'd like some videos on older Jump manga, I also have that too with my History of Shonen Jump series, where I cover the magazine year by year from the very beginning. And if you really like what I make, please consider supporting me on Patreon, as it helps a ton and you can help influence the direction of the channel a bit by voting on what Axe Files I cover. Alongside this, you can also listen to the Patreon exclusive Trent Talks podcast at any tier, and you'll be thanked at the end of my videos with you getting your own little doodle at the $3 and above tier, like Kinocha, Cody, Kaizoku Gairu, Soraquil Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, and Lay Sloggett. Thank you all for supporting me and what I make. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.